Tell me where you think I got it wrong.
People have shown you where things are wrong, but you don't want to hear it.
I don't think the vaccine worked.
Hold on.
Why do we have the highest death rate count in the world by far?
So Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nephew of JFK, went on Breaking Points with Crystal and Saga. And I don't know too much about him, but he does raise some very interesting points, and certainly some points that I agree with. So I'm really, really looking forward to reading all of your comments and your thoughts about RFK. So with that, let's get into the clips.
So day one agenda, what are the priorities?
The priorities on day one will be pardoning Julian Assange, and then starting to fix NIH, FDA, CDC, get them off of their subsistence relationship with the pharmaceutical industry, and unraveling that agency capture, putting the right people in that agency who know how to do that.
And is that just a matter of different personnel, or do you need to have a public option for pharmaceutical companies? Do you need to nationalize the pharmaceutical industry? What does that actually look like?
I don't think that's the right thing. I think we need to get pharmaceutical money out of the regulatory agencies. NIH personnel should not be able to collect royalties on pharmaceutical products that they worked on, which they can do today. NIH has devolved from being a research agency that's supposed to be improving American health, and instead it's become an incubator for pharmaceutical products. So they develop, initial pharmaceutical products in their lab, and then they farm that product out to a university, and they give the universities hundreds of millions of dollars, and to go through phase 1 and phase 2 trials, and then they bring in a pharmaceutical company if the drug works, which they almost always do because they can make them look like they work. And then they bring in a pharmaceutical company to do the phase 3, which is very, very expensive, may cost $1 billion. And along the way, everybody gets a piece of the patent. So NIH gets a piece of the patent. For example, NIH owns half the Moderna patent. And, there's been billions and billions of dollars, maybe $100 billion so far on that platform, on that mRNA platform that NIH developed. And NIH stands to collect half of that money. Not only that, but individuals within NIH, the deputies of Anthony Fauci, have margin rights on that patent. So they can collect $150,000 a year for life, and then their children and so on, as long as that product's being sold. I think we're 79th. We're behind like Costa Rica and Cuba in terms of health outcomes. We have the highest level of chronic disease in the world of any country. That means neurological diseases, autoimmune diseases, allergic diseases like peanut allergies, food allergies, eczema, anaphylaxis, asthma, and we pay more than anybody else. We also consume more pharmaceutical products. I think we take 3 to 4 times as many drugs per capita than Europeans do. And they're not making us healthier. The third largest cause of death in this country after cancer and heart attacks is now pharmaceutical drugs. Americans are the sickest country in the world. This is the sickest generation we've ever had. And we spend $4.3 trillion on healthcare every year. 80% of that goes to treating chronic disease. And to me, the worst, the most alarming metric, when I was a boy, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, by 2006, 54%. And, I'm sure it's gone up since then. That means half our children are debilitated for life from a chronic disease. And the pharmaceutical industry is making a lot of money on that, selling us the EpiPens, the albuterol inhalers, the anti-seizure medication, the insulin shots and all that, and they're making a killing. They make, $500 billion a year, but it's not good for our country. And what we need is public health agencies that are actually focused on public health rather than advancing the pharmaceutical paradigm and profits for these pharmaceutical companies.
So first of all, he mentioned Julian Assange. Completely 100% agree. I don't know why he's still locked up. It is an absolute disgrace that is happening to a journalist in a democratic country like the United States, and there is no excuse for it. And I don't know why Trump didn't do this, and I would love to see a president that has the balls to put the middle finger up to the military-industrial complex and actually pardon him. And obviously, as we've just heard, RFK is a guy who's a big opponent of the pharmaceutical cartel, which, by the way, is probably the reason why he will never be taken seriously as a candidate. Because like he said, there are people making billions and billions of dollars off that, and they wouldn't exactly want anybody to come along and rock the boat. And these are very influential people who have politicians in their pockets because they fund their campaigns. And when the politicians retire, they get cushy, high-paying board positions. That is, of course, on the proviso that they do their dirty work for them whilst they're in office. Furthermore, they have the media in their pocket as well because they fund them. Everyone here probably would have seen during the pandemic the montage of different Pfizer sponsorships on mainstream media shows. And this is why RFK is basically labeled as a quack kook conspiracy theorist by the entire mainstream media. It's funny how that works, hey? And they have done and will continue to do anything that they can to smear him. But the fact is that he's right about a lot of the things that he's saying about big pharmaceutical companies. They are gangsters who are allowed to operate with impunity. And the most common objection that I hear about this is that they've made so many great advancements in technology and in medicine, and vaccines are in most cases an absolute miracle of modern medicine. And life expectancy has gone up because of that, and the rest. And those are good points, and there's obviously so many great things about modern medicine. But it's also important to acknowledge and not just completely ignore the dark side of it. For decades now, Americans in particular are becoming much fatter, more unhealthy, more chronic disease, more autoimmune diseases, and more depressed and anxious than ever before. And the pharmaceutical companies profit off of this. That is good for business. That's what makes money. And what's their objective? I'll let Martin Shkreli tell you about that.
Our shareholders expect me to make as much money as possible for them. And that's the ugly, dirty truth.
Now on to a back and forth they had about climate change. And this one got me thinking.
So you had people who were on the industry side back in the 70s who were saying this is real. Now, in my campaign, I'm not going to be talking a lot about climate. Why is that? Because climate has become a crisis like COVID that the Davos group and other totalitarian elements in our society have used as a pretext for clamping down totalitarian controls.
But isn't that even more of a justification, if you think that, isn't that even more of a justification for you to argue in favor of an approach that doesn't result in the totalitarianism that you're fearful of?
Exactly. So, and I've always said, I've always been cautious about leaning on scientific evidence for climate because, and the reason is it's not persuasive to people who don't want to believe it. I worked for commercial fishermen on the Hudson River for most of my career and all across the country. They love the environment. Most Republicans love the environment. If you tell them you're going to protect this place, this sacred place, your backyard, the water for your children, you're going to protect against toxicity, they're all in. It should not be a divisive issue. The environment should not be a divisive issue.
I understand what you're saying.
But it's hard to persuade people that lines on a graph that say that sometime in the future you're going to suffer. Take my word for it.
Right.
And I want you to give up these things in your life. It just, all it's going to do is polarize people more. But what the argument...
Guys, if you enjoy this analysis and if you get value from this content, then make sure to help me out by leaving a like on the video, subscribing to the channel, and also leave me a comment because there is so much to talk about with this one. Back to the clips.
I've always made is that all of the things that we need to do, whether you believe in climate change or not, you don't have to. And I'm not going to argue with you if you don't believe in it. But all the things we need to do to avert climate change, we ought to be doing anyway to avert war. You know, the oil wars that have cost us $8 trillion since 2002, the poisoning of every fish in America, the toxicity to our children, the asthma attacks, the ozone particulates, the sterilizing of the lakes on the Appalachian. These are all things that everybody's concerned about. And those are the things that I think we can get a consensus on rather than, and we're not going to get a consensus on climate. And climate using, the approach that we've been using up until now has stalled. And if the solutions, which are to get everybody to sign treaties and then have unenforceable milestones that they have to meet that nobody can enforce, that everybody can lie about, and that become an excuse for clamping down totalitarian controls on people, are things that are going to get a lot of pushback. If you talk to people about pollution, and let's switch to something that's more efficient, that's going to provide jobs, that's going to give us a new industry and economic growth, that's something that I think, we can unite people on rather than divide them.
So the big issue that a lot of people have with the whole climate change debate is not that we don't believe that the constant extracting of resources from the earth is a bad thing and will have a negative impact on the environment and ultimately our way of life. The issue is the politicization of the subject and the way in which it is being used by creepy unelected Germans to gain authoritarian power over the world. The current messaging from the left goes something like net zero, stop fracking completely, a move towards 100% renewable energy, and if you don't support this completely and give us unregulated power, then you're basically a Nazi, because we're all going to die in 12 years.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue...
That's why people are repulsed by these ideas. It's because of the messaging. People are not stupid and they know fear-mongering and propaganda when they see it. And it does seem at the moment like there is no middle ground. You're either in the climate cult or you're a Nazi, just like so many other political issues. And I would love to see somebody come along with a balanced perspective, a perspective on what's best for humankind. Somebody who could potentially entice people from both sides under the banner of positive environmental stewardship coupled with continued economic growth and development here and around the world. Perhaps he could be that, perhaps not. But Jordan Peterson's ARC movement is certainly going in that direction, and I will certainly keep you guys updated with any progress with that in the future. Now on to a very interesting point he made about sanctions.
We need to look at this as a humanitarian crisis, and we also need to be honest about the U.S. involvement in the policies that created these huge migrations of people. The decades of austerity programs that we've been imposing in Central America, of wars, of supporting dictators and oppressive regimes, of supporting genocides, of funding death squads in those countries, of trade agreements that were terribly imbalanced, that have created this migration. You look at the one country in Central America that we've never invaded is Costa Rica. And you don't see Costa Rican immigrants flooding to the border in the kind of numbers that we're seeing other people. Costa Rica today is the wealthiest country per capita in Central America. It's the only country that we have not tampered with. And all of these other countries, we funded these wars and death squads and everything else, and we need to change our policies.
So would you commit to lifting sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela? I mean, Venezuela is a source of a lot of migrants right now.
I would not have sanctions against Cuba or Venezuela. I think we ought to be encouraging those countries and not bullying them. And I think people need to be able to choose their own governments. If they're killing people, if they're committing genocide, then I think we should be doing sanctions. If they're doing something that threatens the United States, we should do that. But otherwise, we should try to work with these countries and de-escalate tensions and be a good neighbor and a good leader and not a bully. People all around the world want American leadership. They don't want bullying, and they know the difference.
Now, this is a very powerful part of what RFK stands for. And obviously, he's the nephew of JFK, who got killed by the CIA. And he did a great interview with Russell Brand this week about all of that, which I would highly, highly recommend you guys check out. But the point is that there's no doubt that the USA has been a bully with their foreign policy for decades now. And I really like the notion of them being good neighbors and responsible leaders in the world rather than bullies. That really resonates with me because I'm obviously a huge admirer of the United States, and I'll probably end up settling down there one day. The land of the free, the home of the brave, the bastion of freedom in the world. But that admiration is certainly soured by their damaging foreign policy. Foreign policy that's also created many enemies for them around the world, which it appears as though is catching up with them, with coalitions such as BRICS gaining a lot of strength and power. You see, I like the idea that the US is the global superpower of the world, and I would be terrified if China, for example, were to take their place. But at times, it's very difficult to defend that point when you look at the way in which they have gone about that over the years. And perhaps there is a way to maintain that status without being such a bully, but maybe I'm too much of an idealist. Now on to the heated part of this interview about vaccines.
Vaccines, this is an area where you and I have significant differences. And, you know, just to level with you on this, like, a lot of what you say I really respond to. I think you're a very genuine person, but the across the board, whether you want to call it vaccine skepticism or anti-vax advocacy, which has been a central part of what you've been up to for the past number of years, for me personally, it's an issue, and it's a real sort of red line. And I know I'm not alone in that, especially running in a Democratic primary. There are going to be other millions of people like me who have similar concerns. So how do you win them over? What's your message to people who think like I do?
Well, but just tell me where you think I got it wrong.
Well, I think you get it wrong when you draw a correlation between the rise of things like autism and the introduction of vaccines when there isn't hard scientific evidence tying those things together.
How do you know? Let me ask you this. How do you know there's not a hard scientific evidence?
Well, because the one major study that purported to show that was retracted, and the scientist who conducted it was,
Now, what you're doing now,
basically
Crystal,
fraudulently created. Listen,
no.
Hold on.
You're
But
raising this issue.
I don't want to get in a debate with you about this because you've spent your life pulling out this study and that. I will tell you. Let me just tell you.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Let me just tell you.
I'm not.
I've listened to hours of interviews with you with an open mind, and I'm not persuaded. Now, maybe I'm wrong. That's possible. I'll hold it out there. People can watch. I thought Megyn Kelly did a phenomenal interview with you that went through all these claims piece by piece by piece. I really encourage people to watch that whole exchange because we won't be able to do it justice here in the 5 minutes we have left. But there are going to be people like me who aren't persuaded and who see this as an issue. And the fact that it's been such a central part of your advocacy means I can't just sort of put it to the side and say, oh, well, I'll just ignore, this piece that's been really important to you in your life. So you're running in a Democratic primary. You have a lot of people who feel even more strongly than me who think that, Dr. Fauci is a hero and all of these things. How are you going to persuade them? How are you going to reach them? And what is your message to them?
Well, first of all, I'm not leading with, my opinions about vaccines. But what I say to people is show me where I got it wrong. Show me where I got my science wrong. I've written books about this. I wrote a book about a link between thimerosal and autism that has, I think, 450 distilled scientific studies that confirm and validate that hypothesis, and 1,400 references. And if I got something wrong, show me where it is.
But I think people have shown you where things are wrong, but you don't want to hear it. Is because I've seen, numerous fact checks. Dr. Vinay Prasad, who we, really respect on the COVID vaccine. He went through your interview with All In. He did a fact check. I mean, it's not.
And I did a fact check of Vinay, and you should read that.
I will take a look at it. But I don't think that it's fair to say nobody has ever pointed out anything that's been wrong.
Well, here's what people complain about what I say. And again, I'm not leading on this issue, so people can either take it or leave it. But if you want to, what you just said about me, that I'm sort of hard-headed and stubborn and just won't give in, you're wrong about that. If somebody shows me where I'm wrong, I'm going to correct it. And, we have probably the most robust fact-checking operation now in North America. I have 350 PhD scientists and MD physicians on, CHD's advisory board, including until recently Luc Montagnier, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the HIV virus. Chris Portier, who's the head of the National Toxicity Program at NIH, formerly, probably the top toxicologist in America. And if I were saying things that were scientifically unsound, those people would not stay with us. What I would say to you is, show me where I got it wrong. Show me a study where I got wrong, and I will change my position. Science is fluid. It's not an embarrassment to me if there's a new scientific study that I haven't seen that comes out and says I'm wrong. That's what you're supposed to do with science. But what I'm saying to you, nobody has done that. If Vinay Prasad, when he did his piece, if he showed me science that was valid, I would say I would change my position.
If we got the two of you together, would you be able to do that?
This is so bad. She's played a very, very manipulative move there. She's used the supposed time constraints to avoid having this discussion with him because she knows that if she did, she would get absolutely dragged. If you have a point of contention and you want to tell him that he's wrong and that he supposedly doesn't want to hear it and that other people have proved him wrong so many times, you'd best come a little bit more prepared. But she didn't, because she has no idea what she's talking about at all. And that's why she didn't let him speak. And worse yet, she's claiming to have done all this research on him and to know him basically inside and out. But she clearly hasn't read his book, or any of them for that matter. And that's absolutely clear, and people can see through your little attempt to dodge the debate. And it's all well and good to disagree, but if you're going to come hot out the blocks like that, and tell somebody that they're wrong about the topic that they've written books about and been a thought leader on, you'd want to have a damn strong case. If you don't, then ask them questions, give them the time and space to put their points of view forward, and let the viewers make up their own mind. I know this is meant to be like an alternative show, Breaking Points, and sure it is, but she should be on CNN. She would be perfect for it, and I think Don Lemon's job's going.
Read my response to him.
So you say this isn't what you're leading with, but I just have to say, as someone who is watching your candidacy closely and is aware of the advocacy you've been doing and, the organization that you are involved with, it's hard for me to believe this won't be an important part of how you govern. So I think that's the most important piece for people to get, who you have to accept there are going to be people like me who just don't agree with you on this. You certainly understand that there are many who do think that the vaccines that we have are more beneficial than harmful, that, got their kids vaccinated and are happy for that decision. So how is this going to impact the way that you govern, or does it not at all?
I mean, I'm going to govern according to, what evidence-based medicine. That's
So
the way.
let me give a specific question. If there's another pandemic, in the last pandemic, former President Trump, something we gave him a lot of credit for, he launched Operation Warp Speed. They had a whole of government approach. They used the mRNA technology that was developed using, U.S. taxpayer dollars to get a vaccine out to the population as quickly as possible. How would your approach have differed?
My approach would have been a science-based approach.
Which means what?
Which means and a medicine-based approach, the approach that has been used for, and approved for decades. You look first at therapeutics that are off the shelf, and you look at the efficacy of those. I mean, what I would have done if I was in power then, I would have created an information grid, because now we have this internet that is supposed to benefit us and has become instead an instrument for, totalitarian control. But let's use it for something good. Let's link all 15 million doctors, frontline physicians all over the world, and find out what they're doing to treat this new respiratory virus, and find out what they're saying is working and not working, and then test that with science, and then turn it instantaneously into protocols and recommendations for other scientists.
So would a vaccine development be part of that or not?
Well, I don't think the vaccine worked. I think, if you think it worked, then try to explain to me the countries that were unvaccinated did much better than our.
Many of those countries, because there are a lot of different factors in various countries. So a lot of those countries, as you pointed out before,
why do we have the highest death rate count in the world by far?
I think there are a lot of factors that may go into that. One of them is the fact that we are disproportionately obese as a society. We have the negative health outcomes that you've been talking about. We don't go outside as much as countries, say in Africa. I mean, there are a lot of different factors that may play into that. But I will say, did the vaccines work in the way they were initially promised to prevent spread? No, I don't think so, especially once you got to later variants. But we have a lot of data that shows that in terms of reducing severe hospitalization and death, the vaccines were really important. And maybe there was a cost-benefit analysis.
I want to see that data. I know that's what the industry says.
There is lots of data, and not just from here, from around the world, that shows the vaccine doses, and not just our vaccines, but ones that were created all around the world, reduce severe hospitalization and death. So in that way, yes, I do very much believe that they were.
And let me tell you something. What I believe you're doing now is you're parroting what the public health agencies have been saying, but they do not have a scientific basis for that. And I have another book out that you should look at called Died Suddenly, that goes through all the Johns Hopkins data, which is the dashboard data that everybody uses, and shows exactly what happened when first of all, the vaccine, the Case Western study that is probably the largest, most recent, shows that at most the vaccine gives you a very, very small amount of protection, and that after 7 months, you go into negative efficacy. So you are more, if you got vaccinated, you're more likely to get sick, you're more likely to get severe illness, and you're more likely to die than if you were unvaccinated.
I have not seen that. I have seen study after study that shows the opposite. Listen, I don't want to get bogged down in this because I don't think we're going to see eye to eye here.
Yes, I wouldn't want to get bogged down either if I were you, Crystal. Getting bogged down in the truth sucks sometimes. And I like the show, and I like Saga in particular, but Crystal is basically just a mainstream talking head with all of the mainstream points of views and perspectives that is on a non-mainstream show. She was all about the Russiagate and the COVID lockdowns and all of the other COVID things for that matter. And now she's smearing RFK. To be honest, it's just boring and predictable and not very insightful. But on the point of RFK, he only really came to my attention when I read his book in 2021, The Real Anthony Fauci, about Bill Gates and Big Pharma. It's a book that basically just presents a mountain of evidence that just shatters the whole COVID narrative and really exposes people like Fauci and Gates and the Big Pharma industry for that matter for who they really are. The biggest drug cartel in the world. And just like his uncle did, he has enemies in high places, which is why it's so fascinating to see him running for president and how that's all playing out. And he's a guy who's going to find a lot more support in the alternative media world. So it's actually, in a way, emblematic of what we're seeing with the changing information landscape. He's a contrarian candidate that will be demonized by the mainstream media, but then propped up and given a voice by the alternative. So at the least, it's a very fascinating experiment that's taking place, and it will tell us how we're going in terms of taking back the narrative from the mainstream mob. Will the smear tactics work again, or are enough people unplugged from the matrix to be able to make up their own minds? Will he, at the very least, garner enough attention from alternative sources to be a viable and realistic contender to Sleepy Joe? I'm not sure yet, guys, but certainly enjoying watching it all play out anyway. And as usual, hit the links in the bio and in the comments to check me out on social medias or on all of my other platforms, and click here to watch another video. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.